The sun crept over the horizon of Angel's Haven, its rays catching on the crystalline lenses of dozens of Council surveillance drones that now circled the base like mechanical vultures. Rich Greaves stood at his usual spot on the command center balcony, but the view had changed. Where once he'd seen the free movement of his people going about their duties, now he watched as Council peacekeepers, in their pristine white armor, patrolled in rigid formations. "Sir," a young Angel called from behind him, voice tight with tension. "The Council investigator's ship has entered orbit." Rich didn't turn around. "Thank you, Carter. Alert Nora and have her meet me at the landing pad." He kept his voice steady, though his hand tightened imperceptibly on the railing. They'd been expecting this moment for days. The investigator's vessel was small but elegant, its silver hull unmarked except for the Galactic Council seal. It touched down with precise grace, barely disturbing the dust on the landing pad. Rich and Nora stood waiting a united front as the ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss. Investigator Thera Vale emerged like a shadow-given form. Her Arcturian features were sharp and angular, midnight blue skin almost iridescent in the morning light. But it was her eyes that caught Rich's attention, solid white without pupils, yet somehow radiating an intensity that made even him want to look away. "Commander Greaves," she said, her voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of her species. "I trust you understand why I'm here." Rich nodded. "To investigate our actions regarding the cannibal network and determine whether the Remnant Angels should be allowed to continue operating." A slight smile curved Vale's lips. "That's part of it." She gestured to her aides, who began unloading equipment. "But I'm here to investigate everything, Commander. Every mission, every decision, every credit spent the formation of your organization." Nora stepped forward, diplomatic as always. "We'll provide whatever assistance you need, investigator. We have nothing to hide." "Everyone has something to hide, Mrs. Greaves." Vale's pupilless eyes seemed to pierce right through them. "That's what makes my job interesting." The rest of the day devolved into a parade of interrogations. Rich watched his people endure Vale's questioning with varying degrees of grace. Trevor nearly lost his temper when she suggested the Angels had been operating as glorified mercenaries. Several younger recruits broke down in tears recounting recent events. But it was Louis who worried Rich the most. The young tech specialist sat in his quarters, refusing to emerge even for meals. Through the security feeds, Rich could see him huddled over his console, flinching at every sound. The trauma of recent events still held him firmly in its grip. That evening, the base's main mess hall presented a study in divided loyalty. Angels sat clustered together at their usual tables, while peacekeepers occupied others. The invisible line between them was painfully clear. Rich watched from his own table as his people picked at their food, conversations muted, spirits low. Vale sat alone, datapad in hand, occasionally glancing up to study the dynamics playing out before her. When her white eyes met Rich's across the room, he refused to look away. They both knew this was just the beginning. As the artificial night cycle began and the base's lights dimmed, Rich made his way back to the command center. The quiet hum of surveillance drones followed his progress, a constant reminder of their new reality. At his usual spot on the balcony, he looked out over his home, their home, now transformed into something between a prison and a fortress. "We'll get through this," Nora said softly, appearing at his side. "We've faced worse." Rich took her hand, drawing strength from her presence. "Have we?" he asked quietly. "The network, the council, those were external threats. But this, having our own home turned into a cage, watching our people suffer under scrutiny. This is different." Nora squeezed his hand. "Then we'll adapt. We're Remnant Angels. It's what we do." Above them, the surveillance drones continued their endless patrol, their lenses gleaming in the starlight like artificial eyes, watching, always watching. And somewhere in the darkness beyond, Rich knew greater challenges awaited. This was only the beginning of their trial by fire. The question was, would the Remnant Angels emerge from it stronger, or would they burn? Luis's fingers trembled over his keyboard as strings of data cascaded down his screen. The familiar rhythm of coding usually calmed him, but not today. Not when he was supposed to be helping Vale access the Angels' records, feeling her white eyes boring into his back. Something in the data stream caught his attention, a pattern that shouldn't be there. He hesitated, cursor blinking. "Is there a problem, Mr. McCarthy?" Vale's harmonic voice made him flinch. "No, he swallowed hard, expanded the suspicious data packet. "Actually, yes. These transmissions. They're encrypted, but not with our protocols. Vale leaned closer, her presence making Lewis's skin crawl. Council communications are encrypted by default. This is different, Lewis muttered, his technical curiosity temporarily overwhelming his anxiety. This encryption, it's meant to look like standard council protocols, but there's something hidden underneath. In another part of the base, Rich and Nora huddled over their own terminal in their quarters, one of the few places not under direct surveillance. Nora had managed to access Vale's service record through old contacts. "Look at this," she whispered, highlighting a section. 3 years ago, Vale was stationed on Meridian Prime. There was a vigilante group there called the Stellar Guardians. Rich's eyes narrowed. "I remember them. They were wiped out after some scandal, Vale. She led the investigation that destroyed them. And before that, she did the same to 2 other independent peacekeeping organizations." Nora's face was grim. "This isn't just an investigation, Rich. It's a crusade." Meanwhile, Trevor stood at his usual guard post, watching the council peacekeepers patrol. Something had been nagging at him all day, and now he realized what it was. Some of the guards weren't following their posted routes. Instead, they seemed to linger near certain areas: the armory, the communication hub, the power distribution center. He activated his comm. "Boss, we might have a problem." Before he could elaborate, the base's communication system crackled with static. For a moment, all comms went dead. When they came back online, something felt different. In the tech center, Louis stared at his screen in horror. "No, no, no." His fingers flew across the keyboard. "The encryption I found, it's not just hiding communications. It's hiding commands. Someone's accessing our systems through the Council's security network." Vale's white eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion Louis had seen from her. "Show me." As Louis pulled up the data, his hands began to shake again. The patterns were familiar, too familiar. They reminded him of the code he'd seen at the origin point, before everything went wrong. "It's them," he whispered, panic clawing at his throat. "They're not gone. The network. They're still out there." Vale placed a hand on his shoulder, making him jump. "Stay focused, Mr. McCarthy. If what you're saying is true." She never finished the sentence. The lights in the tech center flickered ominously, and somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail. In their quarters, Rich and Nora were already moving, years of training taking over. "Trevor," Rich barked into his comm, "get to the armory. Now." "Already on my way, boss," Trevor replied. "But we've got company. Some of those peacekeepers I was watching, they just drew weapons on their own people." Rich met Nora's eyes, saw his own realization mirrored there. The network hadn't been destroyed. It had infiltrated the very force sent to guard them. "Sound the alert," Rich commanded. "All Angels to battle stations. And someone get me Vale." As klaxons blared throughout Angel's Haven, Louis sat frozen at his terminal, watching as system after system reported intrusion attempts. The patterns on his screen seemed to dance and twist, mocking him, drawing him back to that dark place in his mind. "Mr. McCarthy." Vale's sharp voice cut through his rising panic. "The Angels need their tech specialist. Are you capable of helping, or do I need to find someone else?" Louis looked up at her, saw something unexpected in those alien eyes, not judgment, but understanding. He took a deep breath, forced his hands to steady. "I can help," he said quietly. "I have to." Outside, the artificial night was broken by the red flash of emergency lights. The surveillance drones continued their patrol, unaware or uncaring that beneath their watchful eyes, Angel's Haven was about to become a battlefield. The enemy wasn't at the gates. They were already inside. The command center erupted in chaos as screens flickered and died one by one, plunging sections into darkness. Rich leaned over the central holodable, its dim blue glow casting harsh shadows across his face as he tracked the cascade of failures. "That's the 4th surveillance grid down," Nora reported, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Internal sensors, external perimeter, communication relays, they're all going dark." Luis hunched over his station nearby, his earlier panic transformed into laser-focused concentration. Investigator Vale stood behind him, her white eyes reflecting the glow of his screens. "There's a pattern here," he muttered, more to himself than the others. "The way they're taking down our systems, I've seen this before." Rich's head snapped up. "Where?" "The origin point." Luis's voice cracked slightly. "It's their signature. The network, they're not just shutting us down, they're hunting for something specific." Vale stepped forward, her midnight blue features taut with tension. What could they be looking for? Before Luis could answer, Trevor's voice crackled over the remaining functional comms. "Boss, we've got movement at the north perimeter. The peacekeepers I flagged earlier. They're letting people in through the maintenance tunnels." Rich straightened, years of combat experience clicking into place. "This isn't just an attack, it's a retrieval operation." His eyes met Vale's. "They're after the evidence we gathered, trying to erase their tracks." "Not just the evidence," Lewis interjected, his face pale in the dim light. "The data I recovered, it has names. Council members, corporate leaders, people in positions of power who were part of the network. If they get their hands on it, they won't." Vale cut in, her harmonics carrying an edge of steel. She turned to Rich. "Commander Greaves, consider my investigation suspended. Your people have provisional authority to defend this base." Rich didn't waste time questioning the sudden shift. "Nora, initiate lockdown protocols. Trevor, get our people armed and in position." Lewis paused, studying the young tech specialist carefully. "Can you get our systems back online?" Lewis took a shuddering breath, then nodded. "Yes, but I'll need help. Their code, it's like fighting shadows. Every time I block one intrusion, 3 more appear." "You'll have whatever you need," Vale said, surprising them all. She tapped her comm, speaking in rapid-fire Arcturian to her loyal peacekeepers. "My people will support your security teams, Commander, but we need to move fast. Once they realize their infiltrators have been compromised." The base's emergency lighting suddenly flashed red, and a new alarm joined the cacophony. Luis's eyes widened as he read the incoming data. "They're powering up ships on the landing pad. Multiple signatures, heavily armed. They're not just coming through the tunnels," Rich realized. "This is a full assault." He keyed his comm. "All Angels, battle stations. This is not a drill. We are under attack by network forces. Defend your positions and watch your back. Some of the peacekeepers are hostiles." As if in response to his words, the sound of blaster fire echoed from somewhere deep in the base. The storm had arrived. "Luis, get our defense systems back online," Rich ordered. "Vale, I need your security codes to identify which of your people we can trust." Nora, he caught his wife's eye, saw his own determination reflected there. "Let's remind these bastards why they feared the Remnant Angels in the first place." The command center transformed into a hub of controlled chaos as Angels and loyal peacekeepers worked side by side, preparing for battle. Through the armored windows they could see ships approaching through the pre-dawn gloom, their running lights marking them like predatory stars. Luis's fingers flew across his keyboard, engaged in an invisible battle against the network's cyber assault. Each line of code was a skirmish, each firewall a fortress to be defended. But this time he wasn't alone in the digital trenches. Vale's tech team flanked him, following his lead, watching his back. Rich stood at the center of it all, watching the pieces fall into place. They had been caught off guard, but they weren't unprepared. Angel's Haven was their home, and they would defend it to the last. As the first explosions lit up the sky outside, Rich allowed himself a grim smile. The network thought they were coming to erase their traces, to silence the Angels once and for all. The first explosion rocked Angel's Haven's outer walls like a thunderclap, sending tremors through the reinforced structure. In the chaos that followed, Rich found himself making a decision he never thought he'd have to make. "You want what?" Vale's white eyes widened, her harmonics pitching higher in disbelief. "Full reinstatement of Angel authority," Rich repeated, his voice steady even as another blast shook the command center. "Your peacekeepers aren't trained for this kind of siege warfare. My people are." A burst of blaster fire erupted from the corridor outside, followed by shouts and the sound of running feet. Vale's expression hardened as she watched one of her own peacekeepers gun down 2 of his former comrades before Trevor tackled him from behind. "Done," she said, pressing her palm to the authorization panel. "But I'm holding you personally responsible for whatever happens next, Greaves." The effect was immediate. Throughout Angel's Haven, security lockdowns lifted on weapons caches and defensive systems. Angels who had been forced to stand down now sprang into action, their movements practiced and precise. In the central hub, Nora coordinated the evacuation of civilian personnel when she stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. Hidden beneath the supposedly standard council transmission was a kill order, not just for the Angels, but for anyone who might have seen the evidence of council corruption. "Rich," she called over the comm, her voice tight. "They're not just here to erase data. This is a purge." Before Rich could respond, Luis's voice cut across all channels, high and strained but determined. "Multiple breaches in sectors 3 through 7. They're using our own defense turrets against us." The sound of mechanical servos whirring to life echoed through the corridors as automated defense systems turned on their creators. Rich watched on the monitors as his people scrambled for cover, caught between network forces outside and compromised defenses inside. Lewis, can you shut them down? I'm trying. The young tech specialist's fingers flew across his console. But every time I lock one system, they've already compromised another. It's like they know our codes, our protocols, because they do, Vale interrupted, studying a datapad with growing alarm. These attack patterns, they're identical to Council military algorithms. They're not just using infiltrators, they're using our own classified protocols against us. Rich's mind raced. If the network had access to Council military codes, the corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. He keyed his comm. All angels fall back to secondary positions. Implement Protocol Omega. Nora's head snapped up. Rich, Protocol Omega isn't tested. If it fails, we're no worse off than we are now. He turned to Vale. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? The Arcturian investigator studied him for a long moment, her pupilless eyes unreadable. Finally, she nodded. What do you need? Have your loyal peacekeepers fall back to these positions. Rich highlighted several points on the base schematic. And get ready to witness something that's not exactly Council approved. Protocol Omega was the Angels' last resort defense system, developed in secret after their encounter with the Origin Point. As Rich initiated the sequence, every light in Angel's Haven went dark. For 3 heartbeats, there was total silence. Then the base came alive again, but differently. Emergency lighting cast everything in a deep purple glow as new systems, hidden beneath the official ones, activated. The compromised defense turrets stuttered and died as their power was rerouted through protected channels. What is this? Vale whispered, watching as the base transformed around them. This, Rich said with grim satisfaction, is what happens when you let a trauma-haunted tech genius redesign your entire infrastructure. Luis managed a small smile, the first real had seen since the ordeal began. I had a lot of time to think after what happened. Figured we should be ready, in case they ever found us. The network forces, expecting to find a vulnerable target, instead found themselves facing an entirely different kind of fortress. But even as the Angels began to push back the assault, Trevor's voice crackled over the comm with news that made Rich's blood run cold. Boss, we've got a problem. Some of the infiltrators, they're heading for the reactor core. Rich met Nora's eyes across the command center, saw his own realization mirrored there. If the reactor was compromised, none of their preparations would matter. Angel's Haven would become a smoking crater in the desert. The corridor leading to the reactor core had become a war zone. Blaster fire lit up the purple-tinged darkness in staccato bursts, turning the ordinarily sterile passageway into a deadly light show. Rich led the charge, his battle-worn armor absorbing hits as he pressed forward with Nora and Trevor flanking him. Lewis, talk to me. Rich shouted over the comm while diving behind a fallen support beam. What are we looking at? Luis's voice crackled through, steadier now that he was in his element. 3 infiltrators reached the reactor level. They're not just planting explosives, Rich. They're trying to trigger a cascade failure. If they succeed, the meltdown will take out everything within 50 kilometers. A blast struck near Rich's position, showering him with sparks. Through the smoke, he caught glimpses of Vale's loyal peacekeepers engaging the infiltrators, their white armor now scored and blackened. The reactor has fail-safes, Nora said, squeezing off precise shots that dropped 2 attackers. They can't just, they're using Council override codes. Vale cut in, her midnight blue face illuminated by weapons fire as she joined them. Codes that shouldn't exist. Someone very high up is helping them. Trevor's laugh was harsh as he tossed a sonic grenade down the corridor. Still think we're the bad guys, investigator. The explosion rattled the walls, momentarily clearing a path forward. Rich seized the opportunity, gesturing his team forward. Luis, can you lock them out of the reactor controls? I'm trying, but Luis's voice caught. Rich, I'd have to go into the systems directly, from the reactor control room. The implications hung heavy in the air. The control room was just ahead, where the heaviest fighting was concentrated, where Luis would have to face his demons head-on. I'll go, Nora volunteered immediately, but Luis cut her off. No, it has to be me. The systems, I modified them after what happened. Only I know how they really work now. Rich pressed his back against the wall as another barrage of fire swept past. He could hear the reactor's hum-changing pitch, growing unstable. They were running out of time. Vale, he said sharply. Your call. Trust Luis with this, or we evacuate now and sacrifice the base. The Arcturian's white eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. Mr. McCarthy, she said formally. I've seen your files. Are you certain you can handle this? Luis's laugh was shaky but determined. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Then we'll get you there, Vale declared, drawing her own weapon. Commander Greaves, shall we remind these vermin why the Angels and the Council were once the greatest forces for justice in the galaxy? Rich's grim smile was answer enough. He keyed his comm. All units converge on reactor level. Priority 1 is getting our tech specialist to the control room. Everything else is secondary. What followed was a symphony of destruction. Angels and loyal peacekeepers moved as one, their combined tactical experience turning the tide. Trevor's explosives expertise created chaos in the enemy ranks. Nora's precision shooting eliminated key threats. Vale's surprising combat skills proved why she'd earned her position. And at the center of it all was Rich, carving a path forward with the determination of a man defending not just his home, but everything he believed in. They reached the reactor control room to find it under siege. Network forces had barricaded themselves inside, the reactor's dangerous whine now clearly audible. The countdown to catastrophe had begun. "Lewis," Rich said quietly, turning to the young tech specialist. "Whatever happened at the origin point, whatever guilt you're carrying, none of that matters now. What matters is that we need you. Can you do this?" Lewis stared at the sealed door, his face pale but set with determination. The haunted look in his eyes remained, but now there was something else there too, purpose. "I got these people into this mess," he said softly. "Time to get them out." The next moments were a blur of coordinated violence. Vale's override codes got them through the first door. Trevor's charges took care of the second. Rich and Nora moved like deadly shadows, years of fighting together making words unnecessary. When it was over, when the last infiltrator fell, Lewis was already at the controls, his fingers dancing across keyboards as he raced against time. The reactor's pitch had reached a fever whine, warning lights flashing across every display. Come on," he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead, as he dove deep into the systems he'd modified during his darkest days. "Don't fail me now." The reactor's scream reached a crescendo and then suddenly silence. In the quiet that followed, Lewis's shoulders began to shake. But this time as the tears came, they were tears of relief, of release, of redemption. They had won this battle. But as Rich looked around at his battered team, at the alliance forged in fire between angels and peacekeepers, he knew the real fight was just beginning. The network had failed to destroy Angel's Haven, but they had revealed just how deep their corruption reached, all the way to the highest levels of the Council itself. And the Remnant Angels had just declared war on them all. The battle for Angel's Heaven's reactor core had only just begun. Emergency lighting cast everything in a blood-red glow, as Rich led his team deeper into the facility's heart, where the real threat awaited them. "Multiple contacts ahead," Nora whispered, her scanner showing a mass of heat signatures converging on their position. "They're different from the others." As if in answer, a horrifying screech echoed through the corridors, something between animal and machine. Rich's blood ran cold as recognition dawned. "Augments," he breathed. "They've sent in their elite." Vale's white eyes widened. "Impossible. The Council banned combat augmentation decades ago." "The network doesn't play by Council rules," Louis said, his voice shaking but determined as he worked on a nearby terminal. "These readings, they're not just augmented. They're like nothing I've ever seen." The first one burst through a ventilation shaft above them, a nightmare of chrome and twisted flesh, moving with impossible speed. Trevor's blast caught it in mid-leap, but the creature barely slowed. "Fall back," Rich roared, unleashing a barrage of covering fire. "Lewis, how long do you need?" 3 minutes to stabilize the reactor remotely, Lewis called back, fingers flying over the keys. "But we'll need to reach the main control panel to prevent another override." The corridor erupted into chaos as more augments joined the fight. They moved like liquid metal, their enhanced bodies shrugging off conventional weapons fire. One of Vale's peacekeepers went down screaming as chrome-plated claws tore through his armor like paper. Nora switched to ionic rounds, an experimental weapon they developed after the origin point incident. The blue-white bolts finally had an effect, shorting out the augment systems in crackling bursts of electricity. "This is what they've become," Vale said grimly, watching the twisted creatures convulse under the ionic assault. "The network isn't just about cannibalism anymore. They're trying to transcend humanity itself. Look out." Trevor's warning came just as the ceiling collapsed, bringing down a massive augment twice the size of the others. Its chrome-plated skull housed multiple eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. The overseer, it spoke, its voice a grating metallic whisper. "We remember you, Angels. Remember your interference, your meddling." Rich's response was a barrage of ionic fire, but the creature moved with impossible speed, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Its enhanced strength sent Rich flying against a wall, his armor cracking under the impact. Rich. Nora's cry was drowned out by the chaos of battle as more augments poured in. But then something unexpected happened. Lewis, who had been working frantically at his terminal, suddenly stood. His eyes held that same haunted look they'd carried since the origin point, but now there was something else there too: fury. "You want to see some real meddling?" he snarled, typing a final command sequence. Throughout the reactor level, hidden speakers crackled to life, emitting a high-pitched tone that made the augment stumble. "What did you do?" Vale demanded, watching as the chrome-plated warriors clutched their enhanced heads in agony. "Fighting fire with fire," Lewis said grimly. "Their augments use network protocols, the same ones I studied at the origin point. The same ones I've been having nightmares about for weeks." The Overseer fought through the sonic assault, its multiple eyes fixing on Luis with murderous intent. "You dare use our own technology against us?" "No," Lewis replied, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I'm using it to shut you down." The sonic attack reached a crescendo, and augments began dropping like puppets with cut strings. But the Overseer kept coming, fighting through the pain, its claws extending toward Luis's throat. Rich intercepted it with a tackle that would have broken a normal human's bones. Together, they crashed through a glass partition into the reactor's main control room. The fighting became desperate, primal, enhanced strength versus years of combat experience. "The reactor," Nora shouted from outside. "Its containment is failing." Rich could see the warning lights flashing on the control panel, but the Overseer had him pinned. Then he felt the pressure ease as Vale and Trevor joined the fray, their combined strength finally enough to push the creature back. "Lewis, now," Rich roared. The young tech specialist vaulted through the broken partition, diving for the control panel. His fingers danced across the keys even as the Overseer broke free again, charging toward him with inhuman speed. Time seemed to slow. Rich saw the creature's claws extending, saw Lewis's determined expression, saw Vale raising her weapon for a shot that might come too late. But Louis didn't flinch. He entered the final command sequence just as the Overseer reached him, and the reactor room plunged into darkness. When the emergency lights came back on, the Overseer lay twitching on the floor, its augments completely shut down by Lewis's virus. Around them, the reactor's angry whine settled back into its normal hum. "It's over," Louis said quietly, looking down at the fallen creature. "They can't use our systems against us anymore." Rich helped him up, noting with pride that the young man's hands had finally stopped shaking. "No," he corrected gently. "Now we take the fight to them." Vale surveyed the carnage, her expression unreadable. "You realize what this means? If these augments came from where I think they did, then we've got proof of Council involvement," Nora finished. "Proof we can't ignore." As if in response, distant explosions reminded them that the battle for Angel's Haven wasn't over yet. But they had won something more important than a tactical victory here. They had shown that the network could be beaten, that their technology could be turned against them. And in facing down these monsters, Luis had finally begun to conquer his own demons. Rich looked at his team, angels and peacekeepers alike, and saw in their eyes the same determination he felt. The real war was just beginning, but now they knew they could win it. The sun rose over Angel's Haven, painting the smoke-streaked sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rich stood in the battle-scarred command center, surrounded by the unlikely alliance of angels and peacekeepers who had fought through the night. The air still smelled of ozone and burning metal, but beneath it was something else: hope. "The last of the network forces have been routed," Nora reported, her armor scorched but her eyes bright with victory. "Trevor's leading the cleanup operation now." Vale stepped forward, her pristine white uniform now stained with evidence of combat. In her hands, she held a data crystal containing her final report. The room fell silent as she activated it, her pupilless eyes scanning the assembled warriors. As chief investigator for the Galactic Council, she began, her harmonic voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I am required to make a full assessment of the Remnant Angels' operations and provide recommendations for their future status." Rich felt tension ripple through his people. Everything they had built hung on Vale's next words. In light of recent events, she continued, and particularly the discovery of network infiltration at the highest levels of Council authority, "I am recommending that the Remnant Angels be granted official peacekeeping status, with operational autonomy under Council oversight." A murmur ran through the crowd. Vale held up a hand for silence. "However," she added, her gaze finding Rich's, "this comes with conditions. The Angels will implement new accountability measures. You will coordinate with Council forces on major operations. And her lips curved in a slight smile. You will accept me as your permanent liaison officer. Rich blinked in surprise. You're staying. Someone needs to keep you in line, Commander Greaves. Her tone was dry but held a note of respect that hadn't been there before. Besides, I find your organization's methods refreshingly effective. Across the room, Luis emerged from a cluster of tech specialists, a mix of angels and peacekeepers who had bonded during the battle. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by something calmer, more focused. The network's not finished, he said, his voice carrying clearly. They'll regroup, try again. But now we know how to fight them. And we're not alone anymore. Rich nodded, feeling a surge of pride as he looked at his young friend. Luis had faced his demons and emerged stronger, just as the angels had emerged stronger from this crucible. Which brings me to my next announcement, Vale said. The Council has authorized a joint task force, specifically targeting network operations. The Remnant angels will take point, with full access to Council resources. Another cheer went up, louder this time. Rich raised his hands for quiet. Before we celebrate, he said, his voice grave, let's remember what we learned here. The network has infiltrated every level of galactic society. They've corrupted officials, twisted technology, and tried to destroy everything we've built. This won't be an easy fight, but it's one worth fighting, Nora added, moving to stand beside him. For every innocent life they've taken, for every world they've terrorized. For justice, Vale agreed. For redemption, Luis said quietly. Rich looked out over the faces before him, angels and peacekeepers, veterans and recruits, all united in purpose. The dawn light streaming through the command center's windows seemed to illuminate them like ancient warriors in a painting, tired but unbowed. Then let's get to work, he said simply. Later, as the base hummed with renewed activity, Rich found Vale on the same balcony where their confrontation had begun days ago. The surveillance drones were gone, replaced by joint patrols of angels and peacekeepers. You knew, didn't you? He asked. From the beginning, you suspected Council corruption. Vale's white eyes reflected the sunset. I knew something was wrong. The angels were too effective, too righteous to be the villains some painted you as. I needed proof, and you gave it to me. At what cost? Rich gestured to the battle damage visible across the base. Less than the cost of letting the network continue unopposed. She turned to face him. The galaxy is changing, Commander. The old ways of doing things, the rigid structures, they're failing. Perhaps what we need now is a reminder that justice can wear many faces. Below them, Luis was leading a joint briefing, his confidence growing as he explained new security protocols to an attentive audience. Trevor and Nora were organizing teams for the first joint operation, angels and peacekeepers seamlessly integrated. Welcome to the family, Rich said quietly. Vale's answering smile was slight but genuine. Don't make me regret this, Greaves. As night fell over Angel's Haven, the base's lights came on, not harsh surveillance spots, but the warm illumination of home. The Remnant angels had faced their greatest challenge and emerged transformed. They had found new allies, new purpose, and new hope. The war against the network was far from over. But now, as Rich watched his expanded family prepare for the battles ahead, he knew they would face it together. Dawn had broken on a new era for the Remnant angels. And this time, they would bring light to the galaxy's shadows not just as warriors, but as officially sanctioned guardians of justice. The real work was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.